Hi, my name is Bahar Poodle, and I'm the DevRel for Scribe Security. And in today's lecture, I'm going to talk to you about what an sbom is and why should you even care about it. So, these days, products are essentially considered a black box. You have no idea what's inside most of these things that you download or that you use on a daily basis. It is doubly true if you consider third party programs, open source packages, and it's true, open source packages by their very name are open, you can look at their code, but they have dependencies, and at some point, trying to look at everything that everything is included, it just becomes untenable, too large to even contemplate. So last year, the Biden administration decided to do something about the visibility of software, specifically the software supply chain, but visibility in general. And in May of 21, the administration released the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. The number is 14028 for those of you who would like to look it up later. Section 4 of this executive order is the one that is most intriguing to our purposes because, among other clauses, the sbom is mentioned by name. Later on in the same clause, NIST is ordered to compose a framework to make the security of the software supply chain and cybersecurity in general into a sort of standard, as it were, or a framework by the name, to make everybody in the well, specifically in the federal government, but essentially all over the ecosystem, follow these guidelines to make software everywhere more secure. And then once again, both in NIST SSDF, the sbom is mentioned by name. So let's take a look at what it actually is. If you're thinking about the sbom, the best comparison is to think about an ingredient list for, let's call it some sort of foodstuff. When you look at a food packaging supermarket, you turn that foodstuff around and you get a list of all the ingredients. Sometimes it's more detailed, sometimes less, but you can see everything that is in there. And that is especially important if you're, for example, allergic to something. Let's say you're allergic to peanuts or gluten or something else. Without that list of ingredients, you would have no way of knowing what is actually in that food product that you're considering buying or consuming. So the same exact thing can be true for software. It's just that instead of some little piece of information printed on a cardboard box containing a foodstuff, we're talking about usually some sort of JSON or other file that contains exactly that type of information. What exactly is in that software artifact? All the information that you require, all the files, all the packages, various bits and pieces of information that, when taken together, gives you the exact same visibility that you were lacking before. When you look at the software bill of materials, which is essentially the acronym for sbom, when you look at that software bill of materials, you know exactly what it is in that software artifact that you're considering using, buying, or actually implementing into your own software. So obviously, a software bill of materials, by its very nature, needs to be standard, because if everybody did their own thing, then there would be no point. It would be exactly as obtuse as people want it to be, hardly usable. So obviously, there's going to be a standard. There is actually at least two that are major ones. There's the Cyclone DX and the SPDX. Those are both the two largest standards that are currently available. The idea behind the sbom is the ability to share it with your clients, your suppliers, basically anybody who might be interested in that software artifact. And of course, be it that it is a standard, it needs to contain the minimum amount of data to be able to pass that standard, the lowest bar needed. NTIA is the one that defined that standard. And those the minimum 7 pieces of information that needs to be in an sbom for it to pass muster are the supplier name or the component manufacturer. We're talking about a supplier name for a specific package or library or component, the component name, named by the supplier, of course, the version number, extremely important, especially if you want to look at CVEs or vulnerabilities or exploit later. Without the version number, it will be almost impossible to find. Other unique identifiers, additional unique data, for example, common platform enumeration, software identification, package uniform resource locators, which are extremely useful to be able to find exactly what it is you're looking for, the exact same component and version that you're referring to in that SBOM. Dependency relationship. Obviously, that is the most common type of relationship between two files or packages. And we want to know when we're looking at that software artifact exactly what is dependent on what. Not only directly, but also the transient dependencies. So you can have a full visibility all through the supply chain of everything that you're using. Even if you're using one package, they might be using other packages, and those packages may use other packages, and so on and so forth. Down the line, ad infinitum. It can go on forever, essentially. And you want to know everything that you're ingesting, because even if you're not allergic to that one software library that you're ingesting, who can say if you're not allergic to something way, way further down the line? So you have to know everything that's there. And of course, finally, in that SBOM, we need to know who's the author of that SBOM data, the entity that created the SBOM, and note that it's different from the entity that created the software. Obviously, they don't have to be the same entity. And a timestamp, because software these days changes very, very quickly. So having an SBOM that is true for that software artifact 3 months ago is practically useless. Most chances are that even if some information on that SBOM is true, the rest of it is no longer relevant or valid. So what are we using that SBOM for? Well, for one thing, one of the first things that comes to mind is identifying vulnerabilities. Remember that now, if you've created an SBOM for a software artifact, you have basically a list of all the software components, all their version numbers. That means that if you have an automated tool, or even manually, if you choose to do so, you can start looking at CVE lists, you can start looking at exploit lists. Sometimes CISA publishes those lists themselves if they consider those to be particularly important. And you can essentially know almost instantly, just by running a simple search, if a particular library or component with a particular version number is present in that software artifact. One of the easiest example for this is Log4j. Log4j was discovered or started happening in the world last December, and one of the biggest time sinks in trying to mitigate that vulnerability or exploit is to figure out if you actually had that package of that version number somewhere in your code. If you have a software, or had a software bill of materials telling you exactly what you have, what version, and where it is, it will make things so much simpler. So that's one use of the SBOM. Quantifying and managing licenses. That is also another very important use, especially in the realm of open source. I don't know if you know this, but open source has a myriad of licenses, lots and lots of different kinds of licenses. Some of them are problematic because if you use a particular type of license in open source, sometimes it says in very, very small letters that everything that uses that particular package has to be open source themselves. And because, like I said, there are transient dependencies, sometimes you ingest something that is then being ingested by something else, and so on and so forth. And there's lots of different steps before it actually gets to you. You may not even know that unknowingly you've ingested something. That means that your entire IP has now been nullified and it's now open source by legal convention. So checking the license agreements of everything that is included in a software artifact is extremely important. The practice is called verifying against license poisoning, because that's exactly what it is if you unknowingly ingested something that doesn't sit well with you. And of course, you can use it to identify security and license requirements, exactly, slightly different from the first 2 points, but you can look at points or problems before they become problems. If you have an SBOM of something you're thinking of using, that means that you can look at it with eyes towards security posture. That means that you will not include it in your code unless you're absolutely certain that it doesn't have any of the problems that you're looking for. Quantify risk, in the software package is basically the same idea, but again, you decide what risks are for you. You might decide that a certain person who makes open source packages is a persona non grata for you. You do not want anything that person ever wrote anywhere near your code. You might decide that a certain country or a certain a type of language, or basically anything that you decide that is a problem, you can, with an sbom, find out in advance and make sure it doesn't get anywhere near your code. And of course, lower costs of vulnerability remediation. I already mentioned the log4j story. Um, like I said, most of the costs incurred by figuring out if you had log4j of the particular version number anywhere in your code was basically, searching, sifting through terabytes of code. Having an itemized list definitely would have made things a lot easier. So what I want to show you now is one of the open source tools, very, very relatively simple tool for creating an SBOM, because there's no point in just talking about it. I want to show you something. The tool that we're talking about now is called Turn. It's open source, very easy to find. You can see the address right now on the screen. It's called Turn Tools. One of the reasons I chose to share this with you is because it's really, really simple, especially if you're just starting out, you have no real idea or no real need to go into too many details, so it's really easy to run. Essentially, you just set up a Python 3 virtual environment, you download and install Turn, and you can just run it. The line, or the code line that you can see here on the screen for running Turn basically gives you a very high-level report. Not a full SBOM, just basically a very initial report that can, well, this shows you basically how I ran it. It takes a while. It depending on the size of the image that you're running it on. But essentially, the high-level image that you're looking at basically only gives you package names, versions, and license. So if you're not really into checking a code very, very deeply, and you're not really interested in dependencies or relationships between packages, this should be enough to give you at least the bare minimum, figuring out if you have a bad or vulnerable package or version number or license. So this should be enough for most requirements. If, however, you want to look deeper and find out more information, you can run that with any standard of SBOM that you want. For example, if you choose to run it as a Cyclone DX standard, you can definitely get a lot more information. This particular snippet of an SBOM that I'm showing you is for the log4j package. I obviously chose it with forethought. When I was running this, at the time, I was running this about 2 months ago on the Couchbase image on Artifactory, and at the time, they still had log4j in that public image. So it just goes to show you that even something as simple as figuring out if they have log4j is not as easy, even for people who do this for a living. You can see here, and that's one of the reasons I chose this format, that you have multiple fields, even though most of them in this particular instance are empty. It just gives you an example of the type of information that you could have. And again, you may not necessarily have all the information for all packages. That's natural. Not everybody share all the information freely, even though we wish they would. But it tells you what you could know. You can know about licenses or license expressions, copyrights, if there are any, authors, URLs, checksums, which are extremely useful, file types, and so on. There's lots of information that you could have, and including, of course, apart from the name, the path. The path telling you exactly, relatively, of course, where that particular piece of software is in that whole artifact is, again, extremely useful. So you don't just happen to know that you do have, in this instance, log4j, you know exactly where it is. So that makes remediation so much easier. Here's another example containing a bit more information. This particular example is for the CodeLine package. And in this particular instance, the reason I chose to share it with you is because you have a checksum type, which is SHA-256, and a hash. And obviously, you can see that if you have hashes of files, that is a huge opportunity to start comparing things. So let's say you're saving SBOMs, which you should for various versions of your product. You can now check if anything untoward happened, if anything changed. You don't even have to look at the files. All you have to do is compare checksums. Extremely useful. Not everybody's doing it, but it's a good plan to think about at the very least. And of course, I did mention checking for CVEs. So where would I be in this presentation if I didn't also give you an open source way of doing that? And that open source solution is gripe, which again, relatively simple, quite easy to find and use. You can see the address on the screen. It's Anchor Gripe. Gripe basically is a tool that gives you a way to scan for CVEs. And now, if you look at the documentation for Gripe, it's quite extensive, but one of the things that make it so appealing if you have an SBOM is that a lot of the heavy lifting has already been done by the creation of the SBOM. You already have an itemized list full of all the information you need, like version numbers, package names, unique identifiers. So Gripe has a much easier time uh, basically giving you exactly the CVEs that are in that particular SBOM or software artifact. So once you have Gripe, basically, again, the installation is extremely simple. You have a curl bash here that you can download and install. And I've also included a way for you to use an SBOM as a way to give Gripe something to run on. You can see that on the screen. Basically, just Gripe SBOM and wherever that SBOM is located on your machine. And what you get after you run this is, relatively simple. You can see on the top an example of no CVEs, and trust me, that is quite rare to find something that has no CVEs in it. And on the bottom, you can see an example with a few CVEs there, just as an example. I ran it on an SBOM on my system, and I get exactly the type of CVEs. I not only get the CVEs, I get the version numbers, the name of the packages, the name of the CVE, the severity of that CVE, and obviously I can choose to get that information as a JSON file. I can pipe it to wherever I want. Another advantage of Gripe is that you can choose to run it either online, which means it's constantly being updated, or if you are running an isolated environment, you can choose to write it offline. In that case, all you have to do is just make sure that you tell Gripe not to be updated and make sure that you yourself update it periodically. Otherwise, your list of CVEs will be a bit out of contact or outdated after a little while, because those things are updated very, very quickly. So that is basically it. All I wanted to say, as a finishing touch, is that the SBOM is an extremely useful tool for giving you greater visibility and greater trust into software artifacts, not only that you are yourself using, but the ones you're considering using or considering ingesting or including in your own software. And if we mention that completely obtuse or bleak black box in the beginning that we have no idea what's in it, then the obvious metaphor for finishing this is that together we can open up the box and see what's in it. You have my email at the bottom here. So if you have any questions about anything that I've shared with you, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'll gladly explain and add any bits of information that are missing, because I think that visibility and trust are concerns that should hopefully be relevant for all of us. And the more of it we have in the ecosystem, the better we'll all be. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you got some value from that. And by the way, if you want more where that came from, we want to invite you to be a part of our community. Go to composability.dev and register today. If you've already registered, you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, if you're on Twitter at all, go to JavaScript Jam and follow us. Why? Because every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we go live. Yeah, live on Twitter Spaces. And you can join us and be with us there while we're live. Heck yeah. You know what? And it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or you've been doing this forever. We love everybody being involved. We bring so many people up to the stage. We have so many great conversations. We want you to be a part of it. All right. We'll see you there.